Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kelly Neff. I'm the National Cloud Marketing Manager here at Veeam. I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation hosted by OffsiteDataSync and Veeam Software. You know, we've always liked collaborating with OffsiteDataSync on webinars like this because, one, we've been partners for a great number of years, but also because OffsiteDataSync is truly an expert when it comes to data protection. They are a nationally recognized, award-winning, platinum-level cloud and service provider for Veeam, and they work with hundreds of customers just like you to deliver best-in-class data backup and disaster recovery services. So today, our topic is about ransomware, which continues to be a leading threat to all organizations and, of course, their data. I'm sure you're reading about this in the news, just as I am, and watching how the crypto locking ransomware attacks are continuing to be a persistent threat. It's not declining in nature. In fact, we're seeing it increasing. There's more and more attacks even just the last few months. So we're glad you're here. Leading our discussion today, we have two of our resident experts. We have Brad Jervis. He's our Senior Cloud Architect from OffsiteDataSync, and Brandon McCoy. He's our Cloud Systems Engineer here at Veeam. So thanks, guys, for putting this together. As we get started, all participants will be in listen-only mode, but if you have questions, please feel free to put those over in the question box of the webinar panel, and I'll come back at the end of the presentation and we'll get your questions answered. So moving on to our agenda today. Our agenda, we're going to start out by providing you the knowledge that you need, not to just understand ransomware, but also how you can become affected, all the possible ways you can become infected, and how human error plays a really big role in this. And then we'll talk about your options and the decisions you're going to need to make, like should you fall victim to ransomware, like what do you do then? And then Brandon's going to jump in to join us to really show us and demonstrate some implementation strategies for data protection, leveraging both Veeam and OffsiteDataSync solutions together. And then finally, we'll wrap up with our best practices for staying protected against ransomware, both now and, of course, into the future. So without further delay, I will turn the stage over to Brad from OffsiteDataSync to get us kicked off.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kelly, and thank you, everyone, for joining. So we're just going to give a brief introduction into ransomware. We know that it's been around for a while. I know I've personally dealt with it for, at least the past 6 or 7 years. It really kind of exploded to take over a lot of the viruses that would infect your computer and make things really not usable and were a big pains. And now they're actually saying, well, okay, instead of just doing that for my own fun, let's see if I can make some money off of it. And that's where the whole ransomware aspect comes into play. So again, I know a lot of you are probably very familiar with this, but just for those who might not be, ransomware is a type of malicious software or malware which restricts access to your computer and or your files on your computer until a ransom amount is paid. So typically, there's a number of ways that it spreads, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But typically, it's spread via social engagement or social engineering, and it effectively goes through whatever files you might have access to, encrypts them, and holds that encryption key for ransom until they receive the payment. And the end goal is basically saying, okay, well, when you send us this payment, we'll send you the encryption key, and you can decrypt your data. We'll talk a little bit about that and how sometimes that doesn't really work. But the other thing that a lot of people don't really think about either is that a lot of times, especially some of these more advanced pieces of ransomware, will actually threaten to leak sensitive information about you. So they might even have that data. They'll set up something to actually transfer that data off-site. They'll get some sensitive information about you, whether it be financial, what have you. And they'll say, if you don't pay us, we'll actually release this to the public, and it could be very problematic for people in specific areas. So just to give you some facts about where we are with ransomware, like I said, it's been around for, I think, about 6 or 7 years now. Don't quote me on that number, but it's somewhere around there. But The ransomware cost total is expected to exceed $8 billion in total damages. Ransomware attacks a business every 14 seconds. Every 14 seconds, a business is getting hit by a ransomware incident. And 91% of all of these attacks are now beginning with a phishing email. Pretty interesting stuff. So just to kind of gloss over something very quickly, there was a company, this is just an example, called CodeSpaces. They actually had to shut down because of a ransomware attack. In this case, it was a little bit different than your typical ransomware. Someone actually retrieved access into their AWS control panel, deleted a number of things, but the end result, because they left everything up to AWS and didn't have backups outside of AWS or anything like that, they had to shut their doors because of their attack on them. So that's kind of just something to really think about, is that this does have potentially more of an impact to you than just being able to say, okay, we'll throw some money at it and fix the problem. In this case, this business actually went out of business. So, you know, a lot of folks might be asking, yeah, I have a small mom and pop shop or what have you. Am I really a target? Well, in the world of ransomware and malware in general, nothing is off limits. They don't care who they hit. As long as you have money, they're going to ask for that back for you. Now, if you're a large organization, typically they'll notice that and say, well, you have this much data or you have this presence, so we're going to ask for a larger sum of money simply because they can. But at the end of the day, if you're a small mom and pop shop, they can certainly hit you and ask you for, you know, $500, $1,000, whatever it might be. So don't think because that you're a small organization that you're not on the target list here. Everyone is a target. Nothing is off limits. So the other thing that we wanted to talk about, and this kind of goes into a little bit what the slide before just showed, is that even if you're in the cloud, you're not 100% saved. You still need to protect your data, even if it is in the cloud. Because again, if someone were to gain access to that AWS control panel, all your data is in AWS, they have the full ability to delete it. And after a certain point, there's not really too much Amazon's going to be able to do for you, or Azure, or whoever your preferred cloud provider is. So let's talk a little bit about how we can get ransomware. How does it mostly come into our organization? Obviously, there's got to be some sort of delivery channel. So as I mentioned before, a lot of this is all done through what's called phishing. Now, phishing is basically recreating either a website or an email or something, basically pretending that you are either a person or an organization in order to take advantage of the good nature of people to gather information from them to be able to use and potentially exploit. So in this case, our common delivery channels are going to be faked websites. We've all noticed, sometimes you might get an email from something that's trying to redirect you to apple.com, but instead it's iapple.com or something, and it looks exactly like Apple's website, but all it's doing is just collecting your login information and sending that data somewhere else for someone to use. Another common delivery channel is going to be compromised advertisements. I've said for a long time that the best virus protection that you can have is going to be an ad blocker, because a lot of these advertising companies don't really take a look into what those advertisements are doing, and some of them might be running malicious code to infect your computer. So there's been a ton of related incidents where advertisements are actually the root cause of infecting that computer. Another delivery channel is going to be downloading untrusted software. So a lot of times software or old software specifically might come up as being signed by an untrusted vendor just because it's old. But really, it's up to the user to understand what they're downloading and understand what executables they're running on their machines. And some great ways is to be able to restrict those users' ability to actually run those executables. We're going to touch on that a little bit later, but this is certainly a way that folks can get infected. Another method is going to be attacking the vulnerabilities that might be inherent in whatever your operating system or browser currently has. All the time we hear vulnerabilities from, whether it be Chrome or Internet Explorer, or more so even than that, Java or Flash, that are running inside these browsers. So a lot of times attackers can exploit these attack vectors, and if you're not running the most up-to-date software, that has patches to fix these security vulnerabilities, you're now going to be at risk. So another way that we can actually get compromised is by someone basically impersonating one of your Skype or any other messaging contacts. Maybe they've actually been compromised themselves, and a malicious user is actually using their messaging platform to deliver this malicious content to you. It's certainly not unheard of. We've seen it a few times. So it is always, one of those things where how do you really know that the person on the other end is actually communicating with you is actually them? It comes up as their name. It could be any other malicious user, and that image file they just sent you, it very well might be a piece of malware that is going to hold your computer for ransom. And the final thing we wanted to make a point about is that these methods are always changing. They're adapting to new vulnerabilities. Folks are releasing, new exploits every day. Just take a look at some of the CVE databases if you're ever curious. So there's always new methods coming out. So it's important for an IT administrator and specifically security professionals to keep up with the latest ways that these malicious users are actually exploiting these vulnerabilities and what vulnerabilities are out there that they can potentially infect our users and therefore our businesses' operations. So just wanted to really quickly cover, because we've noticed in recent news that there's been a number of attacks against the Office 365 vector coming out. And what happens is folks will impersonate some Office 365 emails or potentially infect the user's computer and then have them send out emails that lead to some of these malware downloads, whether it be through supplied executables or zip files or even just links to run a specific application on a website. Office 365 is actually becoming a very large point where folks are starting to say, well, this product has so many users right now, if we could potentially infiltrate it, we could potentially get way more victims and therefore way more money, hence the purpose of ransomware. So it's important to make sure that your Office 365 is protected, that you have detection abilities to discover when someone might be sending out some of these spam emails that might be potentially infecting other members of your organization's machines, and also the ability to recover Office 365 data should a malicious user go in there and actually delete some of those emails. So backing up Office 365 is another item that's going to be very critical with regards to protecting yourself from these malicious folks. So let's talk about something that's a little bit new in ransomware. Ransomware itself, as I mentioned, it's been around for a while, but this is what's a little bit new with it, is that this new thing called Ransomware as a Service came out. And it's a very intelligent idea, albeit for all the wrong reasons. But effectively what they do is you can basically spin up your own ransomware and distribute it through whatever channels that you would like, and it's all done seamlessly. So you have basically the ability to instantly create a brand new ransomware. There's no decryption for it. And coupled with the advent of cryptocurrency, which for those of you who don't know is nothing more than just a digital asset that can be can be exchanged for actual real money through various exchanges and things of that nature. The big key about that is that it's untraceable, which is kind of the reason why this is a perfect storm. So now anyone who has the ability to go and find the ransomware as a service and purchase a set amount of cryptocurrency or set up a cryptocurrency wallet rather, now has the ability to send someone ransomware and ask for a ransom via a cryptocurrency wallet. So we're kind of entering this new era of the ability where anyone can do this, including maybe your 13-year-old neighbor who just wants to do this as a gag. It's entering that point now where anyone can spin up some of these ransomware applications, and through the use of cryptocurrency, be able to take advantage of users. So ransomware as a service, let's just talk a little bit about this. This was something that I hadn't heard about until very recently, but it's like I said, a great idea, although a malicious one. They are increasing daily as far as how these ransomwares are prepared. So what they do is they effectively, when you prepare a new one, they change their encryption method, or they change their backend encryption key. So now, let's say if where previously if you had a piece of ransomware that was very popular and many people were infected, you would find a lot of these ransomware decryption utilities. Well, because of ransomware as a service, it becomes almost impossible to actually have any of those decryption utilities or be able to create them in any sort of manner to where you can go through and actually decrypt all of that data. So now we're left with even less options for attempting to potentially decrypt that data and not pay that ransom. They have point and click deploy, so it's as easy as point and click, boom, I have a ransomware, and I can send it to whomever I want through whatever delivery channels I want. Just because of this, it allows for massive attacks across the entire globe. It's not even just targeted, it doesn't have to be. And it is growing in popularity. So folks are now starting to realize, hey, I can actually maybe make some money from this. Let me just go ahead and just give it a shot. And because of the use of what I'm going to be talking about in a moment, cryptocurrency, there's a very minimal chance that I'm actually going to get caught. So it's becoming a more and more viable option for folks who might not have been so inclined to do it than before. So just really quick overview. For those of you who don't know, cryptocurrency is a digital currency. And the reason why it's very hard to determine who owns a specific piece of cryptocurrency is because it's a decentralized network of nothing more than a bunch of addresses, like you would think of as an IP address. Effectively, all you can see is that such and such address paid such and such address, and there's not a great way to tie individual addresses to an actual user without a heavy amount of forensics involved. So it's basically a great way to send money without anyone knowing that you sent them money, which for the ransomware aficionado, that sounds beautiful. In this case, they just say, okay, send money to this address. Once they get it, they'll say they'll send you the decryption key, and life is good. You'll get your decryption key and your files flew back. Even if you tried to find them, odds are they can send it to a ton of other addresses, and it's going to be long gone before law enforcement would even be able to look at it. So key thing about cryptocurrency is that it's accessible to everyone, it's decentralized, and also it's almost untraceable. So let's talk a little bit about the human factor. I know I mentioned that phishing attacks and social engineering were kind of the ways that a lot of folks are now getting compromised. But there's a lot of ways that they can do this. So one, they can impersonate an authority figure. They can basically say, maybe compromise the CEO's messages via iMessage or what have you and say, hey, I need you to download this, download it, and then suddenly, oh no, everything is encrypted in my environment. Employees can be easily tricked. This is kind of human nature. Humans are inherently nice to each other, and if someone is willing to take advantage of that and able to take advantage of that, a lot of times they will. So we can't really, come down on someone for, doing what they thought was the right thing, downloading a file for the CEO, when in reality it was because it was just someone taking advantage of that nice nature. So the way around that is going to be education and letting people know that if someone asks you to just download a random file for them, it's probably not a good idea unless you figure out what it is. And as we see, it's as easy as one click. Once you download that file, once you run it, well, your system's infected and everything you have access to is now going to potentially be encrypted. And also, frankly, a lot of times, a lot of these folks that try to do these phishing attacks are, out of the country, not in the USA, don't speak English as a primary language. So you would get a message from someone and it's written in terrible English, but they're starting to become a little bit better at crafting these emails and crafting these messages to sound a bit more, English than they had in the past. So it's a lot harder to identify whether or not someone is actually trying to, basically take advantage of you because they don't sound like they have just studied the English language for a month or so. Great, so insider protection. So insider protection is basically is allowing us to protect ourselves from two ways that, a lot of folks don't really consider. So we always think of, okay, These ransomware aficionados, they're somewhere out on the internet, they're hackers, they're trying to attack us from external, but what about inside? What about inside our organization? What about employees that might be departing? What about malicious insiders that, may or may not have received bribes or what have you, or have some vendetta against a user in the organization, whatever it might be. So that's where insider protection comes from, and this is why you need to actually think about, okay, well, I have everything protected from the outside, but if someone were to be malicious on the inside, how would I protect against that? So OffsiteDataSync actually offers insider protection, and what that means is that anytime if you use one of our cloud repositories for cloud backups, you have the ability to sign up for the insider protection platform, which what that does is anytime data is deleted, it's going to remain in a separate location inside OffsiteDataSync's environment for a set amount of time, usually 15 to 30 days. And even if someone goes in and deletes all of your cloud backups, they would have no way to actually go in and delete them from the insider protection recycle bin that we have set up. So if there was a problem and a malicious insider who might have had access to your Veeam console went in and deleted your data, you would just need to contact us, say, hey, this data was deleted erroneously, please restore it, and it's just a matter of us saying, okay, click a button, and that data is restored for you. So we actually do offer a bit of protection against that because it is hard to protect your organization from insiders when these insiders are supposed to be the ones, assisting your organization and making money. So removing any access from them that might prevent them from doing their job obviously isn't a good idea. So this is a little bit of a safety net in the event that you might have some of these malicious insiders inside your organization. There's also something that we can't discredit, and that's going to be human error. We're all human at the end of the day. I've made tons of mistakes, especially in my technology career. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. But you know what? You learn from these mistakes, and we grow from them, and we say, okay, well, I'm not going to make that mistake again. But these mistakes do have actual real-world consequences. So just as an example, a few months ago, AWS was completely brought down to its knees because a single user mistyped a command. The entire platform basically went down because that command basically went through, and I believe it shut everything down. I don't recall the specific details, but the point is the user just mistyped a command and everything went down. So that was definitely a human error. So we need to protect against this as well. We're going to be making these mistakes. We're all humans. No one's perfect. So it's just good practice to make sure that even if someone does make a mistake and either infects their machine with ransomware or deletes backups and then we get ransomware infected, maybe we don't have backups anymore because we haven't been checking them. We need to keep this in mind as well, is that, even the best and brightest of us are going to be making mistakes at the end of the day. So we should probably be prepared for that eventuality. So let's talk about a little bit if you get infected with ransomware. What are my options? What can I do? How can I get my data back? I need to keep my business going as quickly as possible. Money isn't an option at this point because I'm losing maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars every minute that I'm down. How am I going to get this back as quickly as possible? Well, I hate to tell you, but there's really not too many options. One, you could pay the ransom. And as I mentioned before, with the ransomware as a service, odds are nowadays they might not even send you that ransomware key. I'll tell you a very quick story. I actually dealt with a CEO of a company years and years ago. She got ransomware on her local computer. All of her pictures of her family events and everything were completely lost. And she contacted me. I worked for a consulting agency and said, what can I do? What can I do? I need to get these pictures back. These are all the pictures of my family from the past 2 years. It's my 2-year-old daughter. Every small portion of her life is now lost because of this. I said, well, you can restore from backup, but obviously that wasn't an option at the time. So we made the decision to actually go ahead and pay the ransom. This was, I want to say, around 6 years ago, and I told her blatantly, this very well may not produce any results for us. So we can pay, but there's no guarantee. They have no way of being held liable to the fact that we're going to get that back. Luckily, back then, folks had a commitment to actually returning these keys because in its infancy, there was only a few different kinds of ransomware. So if folks started hearing that oh, I paid and I didn't get my key and my data was lost anyway, they're going to get less money. So they actually were a bit incentivized to actually send that back to them. So luckily for her, it worked out. We got her pictures back. Everything was great. Now, nowadays, with ransomware as a service and being able to deploy ransomware but with the click of a button, folks are a lot less inclined to actually return those encryption keys to you. So it could be that they just send out a blast of ransomware, set up their little Bitcoin wallet. Any money that comes in, great, but they're not going to go through the effort of sending that back to you. So you can always try to pay the ransom, but as time goes on and as there's a lot more variants coming out, it's becoming less and less likely that that's actually going to provide you any sort of solution to getting your data back. Now, as I mentioned, you can always restore compromised data from backups, which is great, assuming two things. One, that your backups are working, and two, that your backups also weren't encrypted. It's always so terrible to hear that, oh yeah, just restore from backups, they got our backups too. Those backups are encrypted, we can't do anything. So if option one doesn't work out and option two isn't going to be a viable solution, your only option at that point is going to be to contact your local crime prevention or fraud field office. And a lot of these ransomware folks are from overseas. So the reality is you can contact your local crime prevention or fraud office, but there is a very minimal chance that you're going to get that data back. There's a very minimal chance that they're going to be capable of doing anything to assist, especially if the attacker or the malicious user is from overseas. So it's always something that you should do as a last resort, but at the end of the day, at this point, there's really not too much that some of these folks can do for you with regards to getting your data back. So Kelly, actually, when we were going over this, mentioned briefly, it would be it would be a terrible thing to go to your boss, your CTO, your IT director, whomever, and say, hey, we've been crypto-lockered. We can either pay the ransom, our backups are encrypted, so we can't restore from them, or we can contact the local crime prevention office. That's not something I would ever like to bring to my boss as an option. So just wanted to briefly throw that out there, just that terrible nightmare of a scenario for you. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Brandon with Veeam, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about whether or not you should believe that your backups are enough. Take it away, Brandon.
Thanks, Brad, and appreciate being here today with OffsiteDataSync, and I appreciate everyone for taking some time out of their day to join us. Hopefully you're not too scared by everything Brad has said about ransomware, but don't worry, there is still hope. But we really want to kind of take a look at understanding what your options are and making sure those options are enough. So we're going to start with backups and how those can be hit as well too. I think Brad touched on that a little bit. So there's definitely some options to help you out. I think one real important one is VLAN segmentation. If you search the Veeam website, or if you just Google Veeam ransomware, there's a bunch of white papers and articles that we publish on best practices for ransomware, and this definitely comes up over and over again. So having, for instance, your server and workstations in different VLANs, we see a lot of ransomware hits that are designed to come from within Active Directory. So once they're within that Active Directory, they can really kind of traverse the network and just start on one machine and go to the rest. And workstations are normally where that get hit, right? An employee's laptop or something, and then it somehow seeps into the more critical servers. So VLAN segmentation is super, super important, besides just having some copies of your backups. Now, as Brad mentioned, a lot of times you go to do a restore from your backups and you find out those are encrypted too. So before you even waste the time to check your backups and find out they're encrypted or do even more damage, there's a couple things you can do. So let's say ransomware hits and your production machine is completely locked up. The files are encrypted. You can't use them. You get a message asking for some Bitcoin. A couple options that we have here, and one of those is to use a sandbox to actually do testing of those backups. So Veeam has the ability to spin up a virtual appliance that is isolated from everything else, and you can use a variety of things, right? You can test your backups in there from your repository. You can use non-disruptive storage snapshots. So if you're using the Nimbles, the NetApps, the 3PARs out there on the production, and you're taking those production snapshots, you can do some sandboxing from those snapshots and on that SAN appliance. More importantly is having the 3-2-1 rule, which I'm going to touch on here in a minute. So, you definitely don't want to put all your backups in one basket and just have that one copy of your backup to rely on, right? We really want to separate that out as much as possible. So that kind of leads us into what the 3-2-1 rule is. So if you haven't heard this, it's not necessarily a Veeam created term, but we're definitely big proponents of it, as well as OffsiteDataSync is too. And that's having 3 copies of your data on 2 different media devices, and having one of those offsite, maybe in a cloud repository there at OffsiteDataSync. All right, so that's the first copy is going to be your production data. The second copy is going to be a local backup on some sort of disk-based repository. And the other is going to be a tape or an offsite repository at another data center, or even more preferably a cloud. One really cool thing about having an offsite backup at a Cloud Connect data center versus your own is, again, we talked about harvesting things out of Active Directory. So if they're able to hit your network and they first hit the production machines, hopefully you have really strong username and passwords on your servers and on your repository. So that should help a little bit. But honestly, once they're in Active Directory, there's a good chance they're going to be able to find everything. So if they hit those local backups and then they try to search for everything else, well, the Cloud Connect server and everything in that other data center, those are all different Active Directories, different subnets, completely isolated and separate. So it's a really great idea for having multiple copies of your backups and having one of those offsite. And so we believe that if you follow the 3-2-1 rule, that should lead to 0 errors. There's all kinds of other additional tips and tricks and best practices. So again, if you want some more information, just go to the Veeam website or Google Veeam best practices. We have all kinds of blogs, white papers, and recorded demos on protecting yourself from ransomware. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Brad.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brandon. So let's talk a little bit about best practices to stay protected in 2019. What can we do, besides everything that Brandon mentioned, of course, as an administrator to ensure that we're, A, not going to get compromised, and B, if we get compromised, how can we minimize the impact? So first and foremost, and I'm a big fan of this one, is we have to educate our employees. I think that every organization should go through yearly training of employees just to let them know the latest trends, what to look for, what not to click on websites, what emails are going to be suspicious. We have to have guides developed to give to our employees to say, listen, if you see something like this, don't click it. If you really want to make sure that this is something important, send an email back to the person and say, hey, did you send this to me? Just to make sure that, we're not going to accidentally, have any problems that might result from that. And another great way to do that is to show examples. We need to show examples of what these phishing websites look like. Because folks will say to them, hey, if you go to a website, it looks like an Apple website in my previous example. Just be wary and check the URL. But from someone who might not be familiar with this, they'll say, oh, well, I know what the Apple website looks like. I log into it every day. And then, lo and behold, we get to it, and guess what? That Apple website looks exactly the same, so that user doesn't really understand that, this is a phished website. So at least showing them some examples of what some of these practices look like and how convincing they can be really bring folks down to earth and say, okay, I probably would have fallen for that. At a company a few years ago, we actually went ahead and delivered a fake phishing email to folks, and when they clicked the link, it would pop up with a nice little internal web page that just said, you've been hacked or something. And it was actually a really good exercise and certainly opened up some eyes. So I would definitely recommend, especially if you like to have fun with some of your users, definitely doing something like that, because it's certainly eye-opening to see, oh, I actually can fall for these things. Because as the average person, you say, oh, I'm not going to fall for that. But it turns out sometimes you do. The other second critical item is going to be routine backups. And just like Brandon was saying, following that 3-2-1 rule, making sure that data is spread across as far as you possibly can make it. So in the event that something happens to your local data, your data on a single storage device, you always have at least a single copy of that data specifically offsite, and that's where that one comes from. And that's something that OffsiteDataSync can really help you out with. We also are very interested in this new concept of air gapping backups, which I suppose new isn't really a term that I would use for it. It's been around for quite a while, but the reality is that we haven't really known how useful it could be until recently. Basically, air gapping, for those of you who don't know, is the ability to take that data, place it somewhere else, and make it so that no one else can access that data, not even you as the administrator. So if someone were to hack my admin credentials for all of my applications and everything, even if they could get as deep as they possibly could, they would be unable to delete that air gap data. So that's something that is, again, not new. It's been around for a while with tapes and things of that nature, but it's kind of a new concept that's come out now that a few folks have suffered some of these internal, problems where they've actually gone in and deleted, some of these backups of data. So air gapping is a new thing that's coming out, and a lot of companies, including Veeam, are developing software to be able to easily air gap that backup and make it so that your data is 100% protected no matter what access the intruder gets. And another thing is it's always good to partner with an expert. There's a lot of folks who deal with this on a routine basis. Here at OffsiteDataSync, we've helped tons of folks recover from, ransomware, and we've really become experts at ransomware, protecting your data, best practices, everything else that we've outlined in this presentation. So partner with an expert. Let us know if you need help. Let us know if you have any questions. Veeam is a wonderful utility for backing up that data, and our partnership with them has, just strengthened over the years. So, rely on both of us. Let us do the heavy lifting for you. Let us develop your solution to be able to say to your IT manager, to your CTO, to your CEO, we know that even if the worst happens, our data is going to be protected. So with that, I just wanted to briefly mention some upcoming events that we have going on, both Veeam and OffsiteDataSync. So first and foremost, we have Veeam on Virtual, which is on December 5th. It starts promptly at noon on Eastern Standard Time. And basically, it's just going to be, I want to say, about 5 hours of presentations, new things that are happening with Veeam, some presentations on best practices, and there's a lot of great presenters going on there. I'm actually going to be on the experts panel of the cloud portion, so if you tune in between, I want to say it's between 3:30 and 5 p.m. is the cloud track. If you have any questions, I might be one of the ones answering them for you. It's going to be a really, really exciting time, so make sure you tune in for that. Again, that's December 5th, and I believe it starts promptly at noon, but you can head on over to Veeam's website and check it out just for a little bit more information on that. Also, if you enjoyed this webinar and want to check out some more OffsiteDataSync webinars, we have a Confusion as a Service webinar, as you might notice, and this is something that I've been talking about for a while, is that there's so many as-a-service platforms coming out right now that what the heck do they all do, and I'm just so confused. So that's why we call it Confusion as a Service. So we're just going to go over a few of these as-a-service offerings, give a little bit of a definition to them, and hopefully clear up some of that confusion as a service to determine, okay, here's what I want to use as a service, here's what I want to keep, local for the time being until it becomes a better platform. We're just going to go through some of those items for you, and that's going to be at December 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can check it out at offsitedatasync.com/webinar/CAAS and register for that one. Make sure that you reserve your spot. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Kelly. And Kelly, how are we looking on the question side of things?
Oh, pretty busy over here, Brad. Hey, thank you both. Brandon, Brad, great job. So let's get to the questions. These are some good ones. So first one, we have Albert asking, have you seen a virus that stays dormant for, say, like several months and keeps getting backed up, and when you restore, it's always there?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Brandon. Did you have a good item for this?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can both answer this. But we do see that. I think it was right around when I first started here at Veeam, a little over a couple years ago, and we got a call from a guy who said that he had a local backup copy and that he had backed it up for like a month, so he was doing like daily backups for the month, and then he got hit with the virus. He went to go restore, and he found that all the restore points were corrupted because it was a 0-day virus. So luckily, he had also done the backup copy job. So with Veeam, you can do backup copy jobs, and you can roll your backups into weekly, monthly, yearlies, and save on a lot of space, right? And so while he didn't have the granularity of restoring that he wanted, he was able to go back to, I think, maybe 2 or 3 months ago and at least have some good copy of backups. He lost a little bit of data, but not all was lost because of that archive functionality with Veeam.
Yeah, Brandon, I was going to say that exact same thing. That's one of the best features of Veeam backup copy jobs is to be able to use those GFS points or grandfather, father, sons. And, another point I was going to make is that, some viruses do lie dormant, but it's the responsibility of the administrator to make sure that, you have active virus protection with the latest definitions constantly updated to make sure that even if that virus is lying dormant, we can potentially track it and remediate it before it actually, comes to fruition there. So it does happen, but as long as you maintain active virus definitions on your local computers, that's about the best thing that you can do to prevent against that.
Yeah, and I wanted to add one more thing. So this is a little bit of a sneak peek, but I think it's okay to share as we're almost done with the beta of our update 4, and we'll have it GA pretty soon here too. So in our next version of Veeam, we are going to be releasing a quarantine type of program. So I mentioned earlier that on-demand sandbox. Within that on-demand sandbox, you have the ability to do what we call a sure backup, where the backups are put into an isolated VM that we create for you. It's completely separated from the rest of the network. We do all kinds of application checks. We do VMware tools, heartbeat check, right? But in the next update, we're actually going to be able to integrate with whatever antivirus software you're using and do a scan, a real-time scan inside of that isolated lab, and allow you to pull out any infected data that the antivirus software might find. So.
Okay, great. Good job, guys. Okay, another question coming in from Adrian. What air gapping products is Veeam currently working on? Do we have anything in beta or GA? Like, do we have the dates, that is?
Yeah, so update 4 will have some additional capabilities around that. Update 4 should be GA in January. And there is the first thing that comes to mind. So, obviously we already back up to tape. We don't back up directly to tape, but, if you wanted to use tape as an additional option, you can always do that. And then we're also going to have the ability to do cloud backups. So if we send backups to cloud, those can also be sent to tape as well. So.
And just to add that, OffsiteDataSync is actively working with Veeam product engineers and research and development to be able to determine exactly the best way that air gapping solution is going to look for our customers. So it's something that we're actively working with them on, and we're hoping to offer it to our customers as soon as the solution comes to maturity.
Great, thank you. Okay, has there ever been a ransomware that specifically targets Veeam backups?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there's ever been one specifically targeting Veeam. In all transparency, I'm sure there's been Veeam customers that have been hit by ransomware, but I've never heard specifically of a Veeam of a code that writes and looks specifically for Veeam. I think it's more along the lines of looking for backup software in general. Not 100% sure on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so the great thing that we've had is we've had a lot of customers at OffsiteDataSync who use our Cloud Connect backup functionality who have been hit with ransomware, and they've actually been able to recover from their cloud backups because ransomware, at least as it's come so far hasn't really done anything to directly integrate with Veeam. So all those cloud backups are completely safe, and we've had a number of instances where customers have come to us and said, we're infected by ransomware, our backup files were hosted on a shared drive for whatever reason that was available to a number of our users, and therefore ransomware got over to the shared drive, so all of our backups are encrypted. Please tell us that your backups are fine, and we provide them access to those backup files and restore, and lo and behold, everything works out in the end. So that's where that one offsite piece comes in. That's really helped a number of our users. So definitely consider that in your backup policy to be able to say that I have that one backup file offsite. So even if all of my local backups are encrypted, all of my local VMs are encrypted, that offsite VM those offsite backups are still going to be protected, and I can still recover from that. So it's definitely been a lifeline for a number of our customers. So I would definitely recommend any IT administrator or IT director look at that as a possibility.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, here's another one. Can't I just rename my files to regain access to them after they are encrypted?
I'm not sure about that one. I wouldn't imagine that wouldn't be that easy. If it was, I think that these places probably wouldn't exist as well. But maybe, Brad, I don't know if you have any more experience on how ransomware works specifically.
Kelly, can you ask that again? Apologies, you broke up just
a
tad bit.
Okay, can't I just rename my files to regain access after they're encrypted with ransomware?
No. So the way it works is the ransomware will, be able to be run as your user account. So let's say I'm an end user and I decide to download something and run it from a phished website or email or what have you. When I run that application, I'm giving that application permission to run as me. And that application then subsequently goes through, creates encrypted copies of all of my data. So effectively, they run it through an algorithm that just takes all those ones and zeros and puts them into odd places depending on the algorithm that they choose to use. And then it deletes the original data. So it's not that it's actually going in and doing any sort of a renaming of files. It's actually deleting your files. But what it's doing is it's actually creating encrypted copies of those files. So it's not 100% deleting them for you. So that way, if you try to open it, all you're going to get is just a lot of nonsense that doesn't make any sense because it's encrypted. So once you're encrypted, there's really not too much you can do unless you have that encryption key. Like I mentioned previously, in past years, there actually was software that folks wrote for some of these more popular ransomware malware pieces that would actually, they'd figure out the encryption key and you could recover from that. But because of ransomware as a service, that's becoming less and less plausible. So it really is, at the end of the day, make sure you're protected. Otherwise, you're going to have to pay and hope they give you that encryption key. And if they don't, well, you're really not facing too many options there, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like there's just too many variants at this point, right?
That's it,
Yeah. Okay, here's another one for you. Actually, it's a two-part question. If I want to partner with OffsiteDataSync for my cloud backups, how long does it take to get set up to where I am fully protected against ransomware?
Oh, that's a great question. So if you would like to partner with OffsiteDataSync, please reach out to us at from the information below. So if you're looking to join our partner program, partners@offsitedatasync.com. If you're looking for general sales inquiries, sales@offsitedatasync.com. And they'd be more than happy to work with you. I know we do offer trials of the backup solution to make sure it is going to be a good fit for you. Make sure that you see how easy it actually is. And that trial process is incredibly easy to set up. It's one of the great things about Veeam Cloud Connect in general, along with OffsiteDataSync's solution for the product, is that it's so quick and easy to get set up. There's videos that we've done online, and I think the video is a total of 15 minutes. So it's just a matter of getting a address to connect to, getting a username and password, and then creating a backup copy job to the cloud repository. And I know that sounds very easy, but that's literally as easy as it is. So as far as the second part of the question is how long until my entire environment is protected, it's just going to depend on how much data you have, how long it takes to get up to the cloud, and we have a number of options to facilitate the quicker transfer rate of that. So, we have a number of very large customers, and even though they have rather large, access to the internet connection speeds via their ISP, even they say, well, we have 100 terabytes of data, that's going to take forever to seed. So there's a number of options that we have to seed that data so we don't have to send it all through the internet. And for a lot of folks, we're still kind of getting by on these 20 meg, 30 meg connections up to the internet that really aren't going to be too good at transferring any large amounts of data. So definitely get in touch with our sales team. They can tell you about the trial process and how the seeding works and everything like that. And obviously, it's our goal to make sure that you're protected as quickly as possible. So we'll do everything we can to facilitate that in a speedy manner.
Awesome. And then actually the next part of that question was, is there a report or some type of proof that I can take to my CIO that proves that we are protected?
So yeah, actually, there's a number of items, and I know, Veeam has some products that Brandon might want to speak to, such as Veeam 1 and things of that nature that offer some of those reporting. But we at OffsiteDataSync actually offer DR tests to some of our customers. So you can actually take your Veeam Cloud Connect backups, and we'll take those, spin them up in our environment, and have you perform a 100% fully fledged DR test on them, and provide access information, and then we'll deliver a DR drill report that's going to just go over exactly what we did, the timeline, how long it took to restore this data, the access methods, pretty much everything that you can deliver to your upper management and have them say, oh, wow, okay, so in the event of a disaster, in the event that, let's say, we got crypto lockered and we needed to get up in such and such amount of time, we've already ran through the drill where it took this long to get all of our servers up and running. Here was the access method. Here were the problems that we ran into in the DR test that we needed to resolve, whether it be with applications or a lot of times, an Active Directory domain controller might come up and doesn't come up too well. So here's the commands that we have to run. All that information is contained so that we know in the event of a disaster, we can get up and running in such and such amount of time because it's already been proven, and here's the deliverable to say so.
Got it. Good.
Yeah, and
okay.
I would just add to that, sorry, I was on mute there. I just wanted to add to that, there are some additional reports. So, I did mention the Sure Backup. So testing those backups, on a daily basis or even on a per job basis, we send an email report that says we were able to spin your VM up from its backup file. We checked the application logs, SQL logs. We checked the ports. We pinged it. It was online. We checked VMware Tools Heartbeat. So you can also send that report to your boss, and then Veeam 1 has a possible ransomware monitoring. So even as a preemptive measure, you can set thresholds and alarms for unusual CPU utilization or high writes on data stores, and that could be even like a pre-warning to maybe shut something down or check something out before you get hit with ransomware.
Good. So compliance and job safety all together. That's great.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. If you do a local Veeam backup with encryption, can that be encrypted? I.e., does ransomware encrypt encrypted files?
Yeah, I can answer that. The ransomware doesn't care what data is there at the end of the day. So that file is nothing more than a bunch of ones and zeros, whether it's encrypted or not. So if ransomware comes across an encrypted file, it doesn't care that it's encrypted because it just goes through and re-encrypts it again. So it's effectively encrypting an encrypted file already. It's not going to say, oh, it's encrypted already, let me skip it. It's just going to encrypt it with its own form of encryption. So it is a good idea to encrypt your backups just to protect it from anyone who might get their hands on it, who you don't want to have access to it. But encrypting your backups is not going to protect you from those backups subsequently getting encrypted again, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, something I'd really never thought about before. Good question. Let's see, last one here. Are shadow copies encrypted?
Yeah, Brad, you might have to help me out on this one, but with VSS, I believe definitely that if the actual drives are encrypted, that when that shadow copy happens for the snapshots, that those would be encrypted as well in most cases. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, that's correct. You know, that shadow copy is doing nothing more than effectively what its name implies. It's doing a copy of that data. So if that data becomes encrypted, you can expect that the subsequent shadow copies are encrypted as well. Now, that being said, if you do catch the crypto locker immediately and you have permissions set correctly, there is a chance that your shadow copies might not be encrypted, so you may be able to recover from them. But I certainly wouldn't want to rely on that as my recovery, option for recovering my data for a number of reasons. But that being said, it is a possibility that you might be able to recover from them, depending on the piece of ransomware and how much access you give your users to the underlying file system or operating system, rather. So it depends on a lot of things. Is the short answer, but definitely, I would not rely on that as your 100%. Oh, if I get a ransomware, I'm just going to recover from shadow copies. It might work, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't, you don't want to be in that position.
Right. Great. Well, that's all the questions we have in the queue. If anybody has any further questions as we're closing out, please send them to sales@offsitedatasync.com. And before we leave, Brandon or Brad, do you have any closing comments for our audience?
Yeah, I just want to say that we're going to be sending out this webinar to everyone who attended today in a recording. So you can certainly look back if you missed something. If you happen to join late, you can check out some of that stuff. And also, we're going to be sending links for Veeam on Virtual that I mentioned previously, along with our Confusion as a Service webinar in there. So you'll be able to log in there and register for those for the Veeam on Virtual and also the webinar on December 13th as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for being in such an interactive audience. We really appreciate it. And with that, we will conclude this presentation. Thank you.